Hello and welcome back to this tutorial. When we finished the first video, we had done the first two rows, row 1 and 2, both A and B. I have already gone ahead and done row 3A, which is the blue here in the back. It was a front 1, 19 in the back, front 2, back 1, front 1 and the DC. I'm going to make this row 3B now, and in the next row we're going to start with the solid stitches. So row 3B starts with front 3, back 6. So I'm going to go through the window in the back, grab the DC, pull it to the back, loop, finish the DC in the back. That's one in the back. Two in the back. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the back. Now front 11. Remember, when doing the front, you get only the white. Do not grab the blue as well. You can fold your work a little bit sometimes. Missed that one. One in the back. When you do the one in the back, you will see that the DC is framed behind a window. You see where it is? Also, when you do them in the front, usually they're framed. However, do not trust your frames at the very beginning, because you see that it curves a little bit. You have to pull it out to make it square. And don't always trust your last frame. Look for the stitch. And front 3. And the third one in the front, which is the last, I pull this out a little bit. You see I go in the window, not on a stitch or not on a chain. And chain 3 for the start of the next row. And turn your work. At the start of row 4A, we have some backs and fronts, and then we have 13 DCIB. That means that it's 13 solid stitches in the back. We're going to start with the beginning of the row. With a back 1. Oops, missed it. Missed it again. Back 1. Front 1. I don't say chain because in my world I only do interlocking, so it always carries a chain, but every DC is followed by a chain. back 2, front 10, I can fold it out a little bit to make it easier. And back 10. Now it says 13 solids in the back, 13 DCs in the back. My next stitch is that one, so I'm going to put my first one here. Do not chain. Solid stitches are plain DCs without a chain in the middle. I'm going to turn this around. I put my first one in the DC. Solid stitches means you use the DCs and you use the chain spaces for DCs and do not leave a chain in between. A set of DC in the back, like 13, will be 1, 2 in the chain, 3 in the stitch, 4 in the chain, 5 in the stitch, 6 in the chain, 7 in the stitch, 8 in the chain, 9, 10, 11, 12, and the 13th is going to be in the last stitch there. Okay, the solids are always odd numbers. You always start the solids and end the solids on a DC of the previous row, and all the other stitches go in the chains. So I did 1 and did not chain. I'm going to try to fold this so that you see better what I'm doing. 2 in the chain space, 3 in the stitch, 4 in the chain space, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and the last one is there. Pull it to the back. 13, and after every single set of solids, in this case 13, then you add a chain 1 before continuing. Whether the next stitch will be a stitch in the back and the front, or solids in the back or the front, you always add a chain after a set of solids. Then you do front 2, oops, then you do back 1 through the last hole. I get, that's a sticky one, back 1 and a DC in the last blue window, and chain 3. That was row 4A. And now we're going to introduce color. I thought of showing you a fantastic piece of technology I have, which is a simple box. It is not deeper than a skein of yarn. And I put these rubber bands. Oh, you can make music. And then in here, I put the skeins of yarn in the order that I'm going to use them. So this is my white working yarn. I'm going to put it here, make sure it sits there nicely. Then I'm going to be using red. make sure it stays so that when I pull yarn the whole thing doesn't pop up. And then I'm going to be using white again, because you do not carry the colors, you use colors in each section. So I'm going to put this here, and we're going to start with row 4B. There we go. Row 4B starts with white, back 2, back 2, front 1, back 8, one, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, front 3. After the front 3, I'm going to introduce a new color. The first time I introduce a new color, I do not chain 1, I do the last white stitch, leave it there, grab some red yarn, I put it over my hook, leave a tail for sewing in afterwards, and I chain 1. That's simple. Now I'm going to do with the new color red, front 5. At the end of the front 5, I will not chain 1, because I have to introduce a new color again, which is the white that goes on this side. So I grab some white, leave a tail hanging there to sew later, and I chain 1. And with white, let me take the other colors out. With white, I front 1, and back 4. And chain 3 for the start of the next row. And I do not worry about these that are kind of loose. When I do the next row, I will make sure they're all nice and square. You see that they tend to pull to the side. You kind of have to pull, but they will get very nice and square when you go through it again. So, turning this, I'm going to go away for a little bit. You see how I have my yarns in order. So when I'm going to turn my work, I'm going to turn it this way, for example, and I'm going to turn the box, and surprise, my yarns are not tangled. They're still in the order they're supposed to be. So that's really helpful, especially if you're doing a blanket with a lot of colors. I am now going to start with row 5A. front one, back two, and now I have 3 in the front. I did my back two and a chain 1. This is the next stitch, right? I did my stitch here, that's my next DC. So I make the first one in here. I have to do 3 on a row. Because I have solids underneath, I don't have the chains. So I do 3 on 3 DCs. That's my 3 in the front. And I chain 1 after my set of solids. When you have all these, make sure they don't stay there, because you will grab them when you make a stitch and they won't be available. So as you go past colors, make sure you pull them to the right so that the rest is free of strands. I did my 3 DCs in the front. Now I have to do back 3. So that's the next window. That one corresponds to a chain. This one is a DC. So I put my first DC in the back here. See what I did? I had 13 DCs in the front before. Number 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13 are on DCs. All the others are not. So I used 3 for 3 solids. I skip 1, and the next one is from a DC. If you get lost and you want to check, here you have a DC. That's the stitch that corresponds to a DC. Your stitch should go there. Here you have a chain. That's the stitch that corresponds to a chain. That's my space. So I had to do 3 in the back. Through the window, skip 1, go to the next, pull it to the back, and finish the DC. Chain 1 and 1 more through the window, skip 1, use the next. That's my 3 in the back, chain 1. Sorry. Now we're going to do 9 in the front. That one corresponds to a chain. That one is the next DC. So it's solid, so I will not chain between stitches. 1, 2, let me get this yarn out of the way. 3, 4 in the space, 5 in the DC, 6 in the space, 7, 8, 9, and chain 1. Now you see how it pulls, and you see a little bit of the white one. Do not worry about that, because when we make the next white one, this will also be pulled up with the next row of stitches, and this will look nice as it should. So we did 9 in the front. Now we have to do back 7. Front 2, one, front one, and a DC in the last window, followed by chain 3. That's our row 5A. Now we have already introduced colors, so we're not going to introduce colors, we're just going to work our row 5B, changing colors as we go. Get some yarn. We start the row with, it says white, front 3. Okay, I did the front 3 and I have to change to red. So I get my red yarn, the white out of the way. On my next stitch, I send my hook through, I pull up a loop, chain 2, and the second time I change, I send it through the white one and chain 1. That was 1 stitch in the back, the first stitch of a color change. Then I have front 4. That's front 1. Let me show you. Sorry. That's how it looks like. I have 2 chains there, and this is to be sewn in later. Front 2, front 3, front 4. Now I have to chain 1 and, oh sorry, I have to continue. Back 3. You see, I'm going to make a back stitch on a color change, and it's the same way. I use that stitch for my first back stitch, chain 1, I get the red, a little tug out of the way, and now I have to continue with 2 more backs to use the white later. So what I do, I did back 1, I'm going to go into this stitch, but I'm going to grab the white and carry it with the stitch. That's back 2. Let me show you. You see how I'm carrying the white one to use it a couple of stitches later? And back 3. That's how I carried it. And now I have my white here instead of here. So now I'm going to change to white. I did back 3 in red. Now I'm going to do back 4 in white. Go through the stitch, pick up a white loop, chain 1, chain 2, go through the red, chain 1, That's my first back one. Back 2. Back 3. When you're pulling, or when I am pulling, I don't know if you pull, but you see what happens here? Suddenly this one is in front of the blue, so you could make the mistake of picking it from here. So make sure you always know where your stitches are. This white corresponds to this window. We did 2 in the back, we need to do 4. Four in the back. And now we do a 5 in the front. Back 2. And front 2. 1 in the stitch. The last in the window. And chain 3. And that is what your work looks like, the first 5 rows. I'm going to make one more row with you because let me turn my work around and I have to turn my box around. So the first row we introduced colors. We just did a chain 1 after the white stitch with red and continued with red. The second time we introduced color, we had a stitch to go into. Now, from now on, these stitches that are 2 colored stitches, I call them, they're a little bit different because if you were to place a stitch in just the top, it is not really anchored there. It can move around. So what I do is I place a stitch. You see this extra loop here? I place a stitch through this little, I don't know if it's called the back loop. I put it through there to anchor it better. I'm going to show you. We're now going to start with row 6A. Just a reminder, when you're working with colors, all your colors always hang to the back of your work. This is the front, this is the back. So you don't want them mixed with blue while you work the blue, while you work the A rows. So what I do is I bring it all to the front, to the side, and it's attached to the box. So we're going to do row 6A. That starts with B4. And I always miss the first one. I am very used to knowing where the stitches are, but you may want to do this to find the next one. And if you doubt, when you do a few stitches in the back, you turn your work around to make sure you didn't put them in the wrong place. That was 4 in the back, 4 in the front, 4. And my 4th. And chain 1. Now I have to do 9 solids in the back. So they're going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're going to be until here. So I put my first one without chaining the solids. I look for my chain space, third in a stitch, 4 in a space, 5 in a stitch, 6 in a space, and now I meet solids, so it's the next 3, 7, 8, 9, and chain 1. Now I have to do front 6. Now I'm going to do this slowly. If you want to make sure you have to put your stitch here, right? If you're not very acquainted with this, you send your hook through the window, and then you look for the skip one, use that one, and you pull it to the front. Front 1, I have to do 6 of those. You see it's framed, it's right here, but you can always check in the back if you're doing them correctly at the beginning. Skip 1, I did 1 in the DC, skip 1, 1 in the DC, 1, 2. Now they're getting easier because I see them on this side. 3, 4, 5, and 6, and chain 1. Now I have to do 3 in the back. 1 will be here, 2 in the chain in the middle, 3 here. Oh, there was no chain, sorry. 3 in the back. It's 1 on each of those stitches. One, 2, 3, and chain 1. Front 2, back 1, and a DC in the last window, followed by chain 3. Now this is the third row. We're going to change colors. The first row, when you inserted a new color, you just chained 1 and continued. The second row, you pulled a loop through the bottom stitch. It's the same onwards, but from now on, what I call the 2 colored stitches, if you were to place a stitch here, it's not anchored anywhere. It can move around. So I'm going to show you how to anchor it so that it stays as a grid. We'll get there. My colors. Oh, I almost missed my whole box of yarn. We start with back 1. Am I going to miss this one as well? No. Front 2. Now I have to change to red. Remember that in the previous row we changed the red when we still had the white, so we carried the white a few stitches. This is the same but the opposite. You have to use a red stitch here and you have the yarn here. So what I do is I make sure that the section I'm covering is flat. I send my yarn through my hook through the yarn. I pull up a loop holding here without pulling it, so that it's, but just so that it's enough yarn. I make my chain 2, send the white through and chain 1. So I have a strand of red here that I'm going to grab in the bottom of the stitch. Every time you do this, it will be, I do it so that all these changes will always be covered by solid stitches, so this will be invisible from the front. I did 1 in the front, I have to do 4 in total. So I grab the red as I go. 2, 3, and now I come to a 2-color stitch. As I said, if I just do it in the stitch, it is not anchored. So I grab this extra loop and the stitch, put my loop there and finish my DC. So you see how it's not going to move around, it's going to stay there. I did my 4 in the front, now I have to do back 7. And that's 7. Now I'm going to go back to white. Give this a little tug, and now I change in exactly the color, the 2-color stitch. So I sent my yarn through this extra loop, through the stitch, pull up a white loop, chain 1, chain 2, through the red, chain 1. That's front 1. Now 4 in the back. 3 and 4 in the last window with chain 3. In these 6 rows, you have heard pretty much everything I know about interlocking crochet, about making different stitches and changing colors. I will be meeting you a bit later in another video on some details further on in the light bulb, on the little reflection window, whatever it's called, with some solid stitches of red, and finishing the product. I hope you enjoyed this.